very, very cold here in Toronto. There's a blizzard outside. I have not been well. I'm just recovering from a bout of illness, and I've been knitting, and I haven't really been knitting for over a year. This is sort of what I do, is I have these projects and I start them and then I set them aside for a while and sometimes forget about them or just don't have the interest, and then when I pick them back up, it's like revisiting with an old friend. Knitting is something that I've been doing since I was 12 years old. My neighbor sort of friend named Michael, who I went to school with, his mom was a big knitter and she taught me how to knit. And my mom also knew how to knit, so she supplemented my learning from Michael's mom. But it was something that I just took to right away, and I've never stopped. If you don't know how to knit, a lot of people don't know how to knit, and they have said to me that they would like to learn. My suggestion is, yes, you can watch videos online, and yes, you can get books, but there are so many people out there that knit, and you should really learn how to knit from a person. This is one of those things that really benefits from sitting side by side with someone and having them show you. And anyone that knits is the type of person, if you knit, you're the type of person that will always say yes. A knitter will always say yes. So don't be intimidated or daunted by asking someone if they will show you how to knit. Set aside the time to be with them and have them show you how to cast on and how to do a simple knit stitch and a simple purl stitch. Those are the only two stitches that exist in knitting. And you can go from there. And once you've found your knitting guide, your teacher that's going to show you how to knit, they can act as a consultant. Whenever you need any kind of help or you run into a problem, go to them and ask them. There are also yarn shops and craft stores with knitting supplies, and in those stores there are people that work there that know how to knit. So ask them to show you how to knit. I'm not going to teach you how to knit. I have thought about creating a knitting video, and I'm just not going to do it because I feel like it defeats the thing that I would like to actually share with people. This is something that has been an oral tradition for hundreds of years, and knitting patterns historically were passed down from generation to generation just by showing the younger generation how to knit a certain pattern or use a certain technique. So the mittens I'm knitting right now are a very old-fashioned East Coast mitten, and it's called a double rolled mitten. It is where I have raw sheep's fleece. So this is wool that I just washed, shorn from a border Leicester sheep. I washed it, I got the lanolin and the dirt out of it, and I'm pulling these locks of the fleece out, and then I'm holding the fleece over the working yarn, and I'm making a stitch. You know, you can see, look, there's little bits of straw even, and the straw is both in the yarn and the fleece, because this yarn is yarn that I spun on the spinning wheel. So I'm making a stitch, and then I pull the stitch off once I've made one stitch, and then I take the fleece and I twist it over the working yarn, and then I do another stitch, and that's locking that fleece in place. And now the fleece is at the back, and I'm going to twist it over the working yarn again. And in this way of twisting that fleece over the working yarn in between every stitch, what it's doing is creating a tufted interior to the mitten. So it's a lining that's being created on the mitten. That's going to be incredibly warm. okay? So because it's unspun, what's happening as I'm twisting it around this working yarn is it's getting twisted and it's creating this, look at this beautiful fleecy inside. And this is called a double rolled mitten. The technique and the pattern for this mitten comes from this book by Robin Hansen, Flying Geese and Partridge Feet. It is Robin Hansen's second book. I think this was published in the 80s by a small publisher, Down East Books in Camden, Maine. This is a fantastic book, and it's out of print. And somebody was the cause of all the remaining copies online that were secondhand to disappear. So there is a reprint of this book. It's actually a reprint of the first and second book together that is still available online. So if you want some of these patterns, the only thing that's available is the reprint. But it's a fantastic book. And the original pair of mittens that I'm copying, these double-rolled mittens, are from 1897. And there's a photograph of those mittens in here. These double-rolled mittens. So here they are right here with a shag cuff. And this shag is sort of made in the technique of making a pom-pom, where you're sewing yarn round and round and round a pencil, and you pull the pencil out and you cut the loops and it creates this shag, which is fantastic for creating a sort of a seal in between the mitten and your sleeve. So I plan to make these mittens and try them out when I'm riding my bike around New York City because my hands get freezing cold. So knitting for me, I always forget when I leave my knitting aside and I don't do it for months or a year and then I come back to it. It always takes me back to the place mentally that I remember as a child when I first started learning how to knit. When I made my first pair of mittens, I was so addicted, and I remember making mittens after that so fervently that sometimes I would go to sleep and I couldn't wait to get up in the morning to start making a mitten. I'd wake up and I'd make a mitten in a day. I would just be so obsessed that I would be in my room knitting the homespun wool that I spun at Pioneer Village using fleece, and I would have a mitten done by the end of the day. And I feel really fortunate to have been born in a time before these devices, before cell phones and before iPads. I remember what it was like when my hands were occupied by doing something and I was so obsessed with it that there would be no music playing. I didn't do this in front of the TV. I did it in a quiet space. And I have to say that this recent bout of knitting mittens has taken me back to what that feels like. And I've been kind of lamenting in my head about the loss of this practice of being just alone with your thoughts, alone doing something creative, doing something that is literally constructive, not destructive. And this is where my time is going. The beautiful thing about knitting is that you don't have to do it in one day. You don't have to do it in 1 hour. You can do it 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there. When people say to me, oh, that's so nice that you do that, I just don't have the time for that. I sometimes think about, well, what are you doing with your time? What are you doing with your 5 minutes here and your 10 minutes there, your 20 minutes? Because if you really ask yourself what you're doing with that time, I'm sure you could find the 5, 10, 15-minute increments where you're doing something like this. And what's so wonderful about knitting, the thing that got me hooked from the very beginning, is you kind of cannot believe that a single stitch can contribute to making something. But in the end, when you're holding a mitten that you made, it's so rewarding. It's so rewarding to know that all those little bits of time contributed to actually making something that you're going to use and that's beautiful. This is knitting for centuries has been a functional activity that was a necessity for many, many families. They had to knit because they needed to keep themselves warm in the winter, and they didn't buy this stuff. They made it themselves. Now it's become a sort of pastime, a hobby. But these books, these wonderful old, well, the books about old traditional knitting. Here's Robin Hansen's book. This is another fantastic book. Alice Starmore's book of Fair Isle knitting. And then these are all books that I highly recommend. Is another kind of cornerstone book of knitting, Michael Pearson's Traditional Knitting. And there, in this book, there are stories of Ganseys and patterns, which is something that I'm wearing. I did not knit this. This was knit for me by Marion Brocklehurst, who's almost 90 years old. But the stories of traditional knitting talk about the people and the culture. And there are even some beautiful photographs in there of fisherwomen knitting, like just on their porches. It's so much more is happening when you're knitting than creating a garment. The most important thing that I think that's happening that we can recognize now is what's happening in here. So I encourage anyone that's interested in knitting to pick it up, to learn how. If you know how to knit, yes, to pick it up and continue knitting. If you don't know how to knit, to have someone teach you how to knit, and then to just start. And while you're doing it, give yourself time away from technology. Give yourself time away from the devices. Don't listen to a podcast. Just sit there. Sit there quietly and do this thing, and something will happen. I guarantee it. And you know what? It's not going to happen if you don't give yourself the chance. And this is why I'm so adamant about this, is because when I think about my life and what's valuable in my life, it's the time. It's the time that I have and what I'm doing with that time. And when I'm doing something with my time, it's not only something that's tactile, but I know that while I'm doing this, I'm doing something with my time that's very valuable to my mental health. I become a person again. And this is where I've kind of been lamenting. What is happening? There's so much garbage and junk and poison that is coming from these devices. I look all around me and I see it everywhere, and I have this big question mark of what's happening. What's happening to people's minds and their brains? They're turning into mush. And I can't help but go back to even my childhood, and then go back to a century ago when people were doing things with their hands that were constructive, and their minds were left to contemplate. Because if you leave your mind alone, it's not just going to sit there. It's going to move around, and it's going to start a conversation with itself. That's a good thing. And that is one of the things that's the hugest aspects of knitting for me, is what's happening with my mind while I'm doing this. And I have to say, I've missed it. I've missed it in this bout of illness that has pushed me back to just sitting and knitting. I've been sitting and knitting for hours, and it has been so wonderful. So that's my motivational speech for today, connected to something that's just so practical and useful and beautiful and constructive.